Consciousness. It's one of the great mysteries left to science to explain. You see, we don't really know how it works, or even where inside our brains does consciousness reside. Science has actually mapped out a lot about our brains. It's mapped out the speech, vision, memory centers, and even decision-making parts of our brain. But there is no consciousness center that we can point to. And since our consciousness is just so deeply personal, it feels like something that's nearly impossible to prove and measure in an objective way. Peter Watts's novel Blindsight dares to ask a question about consciousness. And that's, what if consciousness isn't even necessary? What if it's actually an evolutionary dead end? Welcome to Reading Crossbow. I'm Rob, and today I want to talk to you about Blindsight by Peter Watts. You see, a few years ago, I read a science fiction book that really stood out to me. It really got my brain churning and thinking about the bigger picture. And that book was The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu, popularly known for the TV show nowadays as The Three-Body Problem. Dark Forest was the second book in that series and by far my favorite of the trilogy. And ever since I read that book, I really have been looking for a book like that. A book that really just challenges the reader to think about the reality of the world around us. And I think I found that in Blindsight. You see, Blindsight is actually a first contact science fiction novel, but it feels a lot less like it's talking about aliens and more about the alienness of our own minds. The story of Blindsight follows Siri Keaton, the mission's synthesist. Synthesist, that's a new word probably. Well, you see, Curie's job is to actually observe and summarize information. And he's unnervingly good at it. And part of the reason for that is because half of his brain was actually removed during his childhood, severing his connection to his emotional self. And without all that emotional noise, Siri has become almost the perfect observer. Now, the crew that's going out to make this first contact is quite an unusual one. You see, the captain, called the captain, is actually an AI that runs the ship. But since humans aren't very good at taking instructions from an AI, all of the captain's orders get routed through Commander Saristi. Commander Saristi is actually a resurrected vampire. Yes, like a creature from the Pleistocene, this is a predator, a brilliant predator, utterly devoid of all empathy. Brought back by science in almost a Jurassic Park-like way. And it's a very interesting choice to choose as your first contact captain, a creature that has no built-in empathy. Now, the next member or members of the crew is someone that the crew calls the gang. The gang has one body, but 4 different minds. You see, the gang has had their mind partitioned into 4 different distinct personas. And each of these personas is truly a fully developed individual that's completely separate from the rest. And some of them have behaviors, even genders, that don't match the others. For example, one of the personalities, just one of them, actually has synesthesia, and that allows them to see in a very different way than even the other personalities are able to see. Now, there are a few more characters on this crew. There are a couple biologists and a soldier. Now, one of the biologists and the soldier, they actually interact very directly with technology. And so you can start to kind of make out that within this crew itself, there is a wide variation in the spectrum of consciousness. And this is just the human side of this book, because they're going out there to make first contact with an alien mind. And bringing this kind of a crew is a way for the author to actually showcase how consciousness works and why we should really be thinking about it. Now, you see, it's not just a crew. It really is this gallery of minds, each one offering a different lens through which we can see how different ways of thinking, feeling, and perceiving. This crew encounters an alien vessel out in the Oort cloud. And in time, the alien vessel comes to be called Rorschach. Now, it's clear right from the start to everyone that Rorschach is far beyond human capable intelligence. It seemingly is rearranging itself at the atomic level, building itself towards a new and unknown form and purpose. And as it begins to communicate with the humans, it does so in some ways that are very obvious, in some ways that are hard to even comprehend for the characters in this book. But here's the twist. The aliens of Blindsight are genuinely intelligent, but they don't seem to be sentient. There's no personality, there's no emotion, there's no self-awareness, there is no consciousness. These are not the people with different nose ridges that you get in other science fiction. These are truly aliens. Now, it's interesting because they actually start to see human consciousness in a way that we might see a virus, an inefficient, malfunctioning process that doesn't really get to be classified as life as we understand it. Now, in this book, Peter Watts challenges our assumptions about sentience and is it actually required to have intelligence? Now, you see, one of the ways the book goes about challenging the reader is it brings up the Chinese room thought experiment. Now, this was a thought experiment from the 1980s, but here's how it goes. Imagine there's a person inside a room. They receive Chinese characters through a slot, and using a whole bunch of books, they produce the correct response and send it back out through the same slot, all without understanding a single word of Chinese. They cannot read, they cannot speak it. But from the outside of this box, it looks like they're having a fluent conversation. Inside, it really is just mechanical processing. This was originally developed as a way to describe a Turing test. Now, you might be thinking, does this maybe sound a bit familiar or maybe something relevant to our time today? Well, in a lot of ways, these modern generative AI works in much the same way. It can give great responses, but it doesn't really seemingly understand them. To give an example of what I mean by that is take the AI researcher Kellen Pellerin. A couple of years ago, they did an experiment where they actually challenged some of the best Go AI programs that had been built, programs that had been defeating grandmasters of the game Go, a game that was long believed to be nearly impossible for AI to master. And when it did, it was quite the big shock for a lot of people. And yet, Kellen was able to beat these Go AIs 14 out of 15 times. And not just one AI, but multiple AI. And Kellen was able to do so by exploiting a blind spot. You see, the AI was actually making what you might consider all the correct moves, but it didn't grasp the trap that was being built. You see, the trap was something that a human would never ever fall for. It was so obvious and simple. But these AIs were not able to understand the trap. And AI over and over and over fell for the trap and were unable to learn from that experience. And the reason why is actually quite simple. It's because these AIs don't understand truly the game that they're playing. They're just following rules, and they're following those rules correctly. But when someone's playing Go very badly, seemingly, there's no counter. Now, I first heard about the Chinese room actually a few months ago in discussion about a lot of these new AI programs and how they're being brought into our lives every day. So it was very interesting when this essentially came up almost immediately after I'd heard the phrase for the first time. Now, Blindsight, the novel, doesn't just stop at these aliens and their minds. For the most part, the book is focused on humanity, and humanity in all of its consciousness diversity. So, we've already gone through the crew and how wildly different they are, but through some flashbacks, we learn about Siri's childhood friend, a friend who realizes Siri can't feel any emotions, but still plays the role as if Siri could, to be a good friend. Siri also has an ex-girlfriend who actually was, interestingly, a specialist in personality modification. And finally, the last flashbacks really focused on Siri's mother, a person who has essentially given up on the real world and uploaded her mind into a virtual world in order to feel control and meaning in her life. So within the crew of the Theseus, we can see how there's a wide variety of the spectrum of human consciousness. Some of them are very real, including Siri's bisected brain, and others are more science fiction concepts, such as the partitioned mind or the science fiction resurrected vampire. But our human experience, we all experience the world in very different ways. Some people, like myself, have internal monologues where, in a way, you're kind of narrating your day or talking out problems inside your head. Other people don't have any form of internal dialogue. And that without that monologue, some people handle that in a variety of different ways. Some people might think about it in abstract concepts or pictures or just feelings. And even within the internal monologue side of humanity, there are some people who think in very brief, simple words or concepts, and other people who have long, drawn-out conversations with themselves. And this is the normal spectrum of humanity. Now, there's also, I mentioned earlier about some some people can think visually. Most people in the world are able to think where they can imagine pictures in their head or remember faces or imagine a piece of art inside their minds. Now, this might be a very low resolution picture, and for some people, it might be full HD, 8K, seeing everything, like very in depth. On the opposite end of that are also people like myself who have no mind's eye. I don't see pictures at all. If you actually watch back through our past videos, Lena is always talking about how it's very important for her to understand like people's hair colors and eye colors and what they look like, because that's how she can project these things into her head. And I seemingly never care. And the reason why is because that information doesn't go anywhere. It's not doing anything for me. Now, I will talk about something how it seems like a book or seems like a movie where, a scene or the whole book is as a whole might come across like, and it's like, oh, this is very cinematic. But that's more a description of how the vibe of that, or maybe the scene is something that is like, man, I think that would look really cool as a movie. But I'm not picturing it at all. And now that's just a couple different forms of normal human consciousness. You even have things like the autism spectrum, psychopaths, empaths, where they feel other people's emotions, like deeply. You have some people who have a very deep depersonalization, where they don't even feel like they're attached to their own body. And these are all very real variations in human consciousness that are all relatively normal. So even our perception of reality is suspect. You see, humans have awful vision. Our brains actually have to build up an illusion that seems like full, high definition video that we perceive the world in. But the reality is, we see it only in like the simplest terms. We have awful vision, but our minds are strong enough that actually builds up a very strong world that we perceive and think we're perceiving. The funny thing is, most of that, as I mentioned, is an illusion. And that's actually why things like stage magic work, because it pushes up against that illusion that our mind is creating based on our past expectations, and essentially our own brains are tricking us to help that magician accomplish their illusions. Now, I think this is where the book Blindsight really does deliver on its most brutal idea. And that's, what if consciousness or sentience is actually a liability? You see, the human brain actually spends massive amounts of energy and resources maintaining our illusion of reality and navigating all of the social emotions and interactions we have within this world. The book brings up this concept of a philosophical zombie, a creature with no emotion, no self-awareness, and how it could redirect all of those other resources towards just pure computation. No distractions, just efficiency. So Blindsight goes on to ask, are consciousness, empathy, and sentience actually evolutionary advantages, or are they truly just holding us back? For example, let's take something like the stereotype of a psychopath. Psychopaths don't really feel emotion the way the average human experience feels it. But when we look at the human population, psychopaths seem, the normal bell curve of humanity, psychopaths seem to be mostly at the edges. Basically, one side has deeply troubling interaction with society. They have a hard time with society and might end up in things like prison. But at the other end of that bell curve of humanity is there's a lot, seemingly, of CEOs, politicians, powerful people in our world that display a lot of traits that we normally associate with psychopaths. Now, that doesn't mean that they are diagnosable psychopaths, but they are closer to that side of things. And in some ways, at least for that side, it might be an evolutionary advantage. They can actually make the difficult decisions because they don't feel emotions as deeply as other people. They may not be as concerned with the feelings and life experiences of other minds, and instead are focusing on what they seem as what's more important for them or the bigger picture for humanity. And this is where Blindsight doesn't feel like just a sci-fi novel. It really is this philosophical gut punch. It forces you to ask yourself the question, what is consciousness? And is it even necessary? And if it isn't necessary for intelligence, what does that mean for us? So if you like science fiction books that really challenge you, that force you to try to think outside the box, I think Blindsight should be added to your essential reading list. I don't feel like this book is for everyone. It's more of a challenging read, but it is also a very rewarding book if this is the kind of book that you're going to enjoy. Like I said, for me, I would use the bar of maybe the three body problem because it has a similar kind of thought process that I found myself going through as I read this book. And I really do want to recommend this book to you if that's the kind of science fiction you like to read. So, until next time, thank you for watching Reading Crossbow, and we will be back this month for some more sci-fi and fantasy book reviews with both Lena and myself, as well as a few individual videos as normal.